Thanks for the intro, mate. Hello, everyone. I'm Suresh Viragoni. I work at AWS with our leading foundation model partners such as Anthropic, DeepSeek, Meta AI. Fun fact, I'm a huge fan of this Oscar-winning musician called A.R. Rahman. He occasionally makes US tours. Back in 2008, I managed to sneak into his concert before the concert started. As a huge fan, I wanted to meet him. So they thought I was a crew because I was wearing his T-shirt with his face on it. So now you know what happens due to lack of good governance, even though the outcome was not that adverse in this case, at
Yeah,
least for
we
me.
need a policy for not breaking into concerts for you.
Yes.
Uh, yeah. Hey, Suresh. It's great to be on. Hey, Umair. I've been really enjoying all the talk so far. Yeah, I'm Sunny. I'm head of product here at Stacklet. Previously, I've been a cloud engineer at some companies you may have heard of, Capital One, Hulu. I've been in the cloud custodian community as a contributor maintainer since 2017. So it's been quite a long time. But really excited to talk about AI and how exactly we can fit this into the FinOps use case. I think there's a lot of really interesting ways that we could use AI, especially around the some of the tasks that are more well suited for that. Maybe not some of the social challenges that Nikki was talking about earlier. Um, but just to satisfy Umair's fun fact, I consider myself a foodie. I love to eat. So I'm definitely excited to see you all in San Diego for FinOps X, where we'll be doing a food tour and uh, definitely ready to get some good food in. With that being said, happy to get started. So title of the talk here, the art of the possible. This will be sort of a coverage on high level how AI, especially in terms of large language models and generative AI, sort of work and how we can scale that out, add additional functionality throughout. So um, for some of you, this may be sort of remedial. If you're already familiar with the content, that's great. We'd love to get more of this information on how this ties into FinOps for you. But if you're sort of unaware of how some of these tools work under the hood, I think this will be really interesting to see how that all works. So first of all, I'll hand it over to Suresh to start. I think we've all used tools like Claude or ChatGPT, in the last like 12 to 24 months, we've seen it improve. Could you just go over sort of how generative AI works on a broad level and then maybe some of the challenges that we see?
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, and these are amazing applications, and what's powering them is these generative AI models, right? Which can understand like the text, these we call them as modalities, right? Like the text, audio, video, images, and these models are very powerful because they are trained on massive amounts of this data that is sitting on the internet. And that's what makes them so powerful, and that's why you're seeing the apps like Claude so powerful. But as you see in this visual, data coming in and LLM as a brain able to understand the information and coming out, the output is as good as the input. That is both you are giving as well as what it is the model trained on. So you can see when you're chatting with these applications, they are very generic. They are very good at giving generic insights. But when it comes to any specific domain, in this case, like FinOps domain, the output is as good as the context that you are giving, right? So it's very important that you build user experience and applications where the application is actually taking the right context in, and also the model is fine-tuned or be good at reasoning to make sure that you get the necessary outcome. So we can go to the next slide to kind of talk about some of the challenges, that we just mentioned about, right? Like how to compensate these challenges. So there are a few architectural techniques that come into play to make sure that it works better for FinOps use cases. The step one is to understand what the user said and then retrieve the relevant information from your systems, right? Whether you use this pattern called retrieval augmented generation, or you could use an API call of your system, right, to get the relevant information. The point here is like, how do you enrich your input data dynamically and the application context that you are in, and then making sure that that input is going into the model so that the model is able to get the right output. And that's step two. Now, Sani, can you explain like, what you do using these two techniques in general?
Yeah, so if we get into some of the use cases here for specifically for FinOps and RAG and tool usage, um, from the outset, these may seem like daunting or difficult concepts, but truthfully, what we're talking about in terms of RAG, retrieval augmented generation, is about going out and typically utilizing something, a vector database of some sort, um, to pull information from data sources that are particularly interesting to your specific context, right? So as Suresh is saying, some of the data that's out on the public internet, may not be entirely relevant, or there may be new techniques, especially as the cloud service providers are rapidly updating and changing, that some of the FinOps opportunities and FinOps best practices just aren't available in these large models, right? Like you have to remember that these models are typically trained, especially ones with billions and billions of parameters, that these models are trained in sort of a snapshot in time, right? And so, specifically for the FinOps use case, Stackly has a wide variety of um, features under its belt, one of which is our real-time asset inventory database, which is built on top of a SQL interface. So, something like Claude, as great as Claude is, and it is really truly great in terms of like the large models, especially, I've been watching, what's recently come out with Sonnet 3.7. Um, it doesn't have access to our schema. And even if it had access to our schema, it wouldn't be able to run a query on your behalf, right? And so being able to take that schema, that's sort of the RAG part, right? Be able to go and understand how exactly your specific data set and data structure works. That's the augmented generation. And then be able to run the query. That's basically the tool part. And of course, we've been talking a lot about policies throughout the summit. And policy generation is something that is, it is open source, right? Cloud custodian is open source. But some of the additional feature sets there in terms of being able to validate the policy, be able to drive around the policy, that's stuff that's uh, you know uh, uh, directly tool usage there. So and also retrieval augmented generation, just because the policy language itself is open source, doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of examples, so to speak. And so that's where retrieval augmented generation can also still play a large part in terms of being able to feed in additional tokens into the LLM to understand what a well-formed policy might look like. And then finally, in terms of this additional access, you at your organization are likely going to have organization-specific best practices, right? And that's something that from like a Q&A Slack bot or chat bot, Teams bot, whatever sort of experience, you want to give your engineers the data that is accurate and relevant to them, not just what's on the internet. Y- Slightly outside the FinOps realm, but you may have a specific encryption requirement using specific KMS keys. That's not going to be available on the public internet, and the models are not going to be trained on that. So it's really important to augment these large foundational models with specific organization data. Um, Next up, just to talk briefly about some of the challenges here to enabling RAG and enabling tool usage. I think standardized cloud data structures, being able to access that data in terms of the data about the resources in your cloud, the data about the the cost in your cloud on a resource basis. Talked a bit about utilizing vector databases for retrieval augmented generation. There is sort of ETL data pipeline stuff that you need to be aware of in terms of building that out in order to chunk the data correctly to get that data into a vector database that the LLM can work with. And of course, using tools like Bedrock in AWS to get that does require a bit of architecture and infrastructure to get set up. Next, RBAC and data security. If you build out an LLM, you really want to make sure that if it's using this retrieval augmented generation and it's using these tools to run SQL queries on your behalf, that the access control that you have set up doesn't leak out of the LLM, right? And so there's an additional layer there from a security point of view to ensure that your LLM is not a separate vector in terms of a data exfiltration or enhancement in terms of people's permission on the cloud data that you have. And of course, RAG and tool usage and just LLMs in general are great in terms of if I'm sitting in front of a computer and I'm typing directly to the chatbot, but it starts to lack in terms of being able to handle multi-step prompts or multi-step workflows. So these workflows, I'm sure like if you think about the case where you're trying to socialize a new FinOps policy out there, it's not just I write the policy and I'm done. It's I write the policy, I test the policy, I go talk to someone, I share the results, I share the forecasting, I share the findings. And that's a multi-step, like long running sort of workflow that you have to go through. And currently, RAG and tools, they can do a lot, but they can't necessarily do that. So anyway, moving on, I'll throw it back over to Suresh in terms of these challenges that we have. I've been hearing a lot about agents, and of course, I think that was a very, very cool name. But too, I think some of the functionality and capabilities here are particularly interesting. Suresh, could you walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the previous slide, you rightly mentioned, like, we talked about RAG and tools. They're great, but implementing it is very hard. And then that's where I think Stacklet kind of comes into picture to make sure that they solve it, because that's why what we are seeing essentially is like a lot of projects get stuck in POC because they are not able to get the RAG work properly because of all the effort that goes into it, chunking, retrieving, making sure that they are relevant, making sure that you have security, all those things. When it comes to agents, the evolution that we are seeing since 2023 is, when generative AI started back in 2023, there's a lot of consumer adoption because of the applications that came out around that time. A lot of POCs businesses started doing. In 2024, that we have seen a lot of customers go into production, and they are seeing the value add in terms of the productivity gains. Now, in 2025, what businesses are getting more into is like every business segment that you could imagine, including FinOps. They want to get more value out of the workloads, the workflow automation that they are doing using the AI agent workflows, right? What do we mean by that, right? So, what do we mean by agent, right? There's a lot of uncertainty or definitions around the internet on what agents is. Essentially, it is built on the same primitives. Like you can see this diagram, like it looks very similar to the previous one. It is still built on the same primitives like retrieval augmented generation and tool function calling, etc. But they're more autonomous in nature. They are more, you give a goal, right? And the agent is basically a compute construct behind the scenes, like some kind of application where it's taking a goal and then it is using the primitives that we just mentioned, like RAG and tool. And then it is always long running, right? It is always continuously monitoring to achieve the goal. You could have multiple agents with different goals coordinating among themselves. And then they can plan better because there is a evolution of models happened since the beginning of the models back in 2023 to now. Even still it is happening, like the models are able to reason better. We have reasoning models, they can think like humans, etc. So that's what is happening. So it's the same picture. It's just that they are becoming more autonomous, more sophisticated, long running, and then ability to plan and reason better. So that's what we are saying. So Sunny, like, can you explain like what you are doing in agentic AI in FinOps space?
Yeah, for these long-running tasks, I think especially around policy generation, we found that internally what we're using Juno for, and Juno is our large language model of sort of FinOps and policy agent that we run is we try to orchestrate the entire policy authoring lifecycle such that we could go from intent to policy. And that's not just, having generated a bunch of YAML, which is definitely the first step to that. But also includes things like validating the policy, creating infrastructure as code, and deploying that infrastructure as code in order to test the policy. We found that that's actually a really great productivity boost for us in terms of some of these resources can take a long time to deploy. Like for example, if you ever deployed a RDS instance, or if you ever deployed yeah, Elastic Search or Elasticache cluster, the uh, just time that a lot of policy authors we've seen are spent just waiting for infrastructure to come up is detrimental to getting rapid progress. Um, some additional use cases here on the reporting side of things, uh, getting an LM to generate a query against AcidDB and then having that send a notification out, or having that trigger a weekly or monthly report. I think that that's a super specific and great use case where the agent can really shine in terms of orchestrating across things like our notification system and AcidDB as well. To talk about a bit on the challenges that we see. So first of all, like as these tools get more and more autonomous, uh, turns out your agents also need guardrails, right, to ensure that they're not doing something autonomous on your behalf that you don't want. Uh, Next, multi-step workflow resilience. So making sure that these agents are able to gracefully recover if something goes wrong or something starts to go the wrong way. Uh, Thirdly, dynamic intent alignment. It's a term we use in terms of describing these agents. Yes, they are very powerful. Yes, they can move very quickly, but sometimes they get distracted, right? Sometimes they go down a rabbit hole. They start going into a different direction, and making sure that the agents themselves are aligned ultimately on user intent, because if they're going off and doing something that you don't want them to do, you're just wasting tokens. You're increasing costs, and that's the opposite of what we want, right? Um, and some of the same challenges from RAG and tool usage still apply here in terms of being able to secure access, especially on an RBAC perspective of making sure that when the agents are acting on a user's behalf, that the agent doesn't necessarily have additional access that they shouldn't have. And then finally, of course, what's the result of what an agent's doing? Are the results and outcomes valid? Are they aligned with the original user intent? Um, so I've talked a bit, I guess, of the abstract, but here's sort of a concrete written down version of what I was talking about in terms of going from intent to policy. So, if I'm a user, I'm asking like, how much can I save with off hours? I want you to implement a policy for me. I want you to forecast the savings and send me the results. The agent itself is going to take, in this case, seven steps written down here, but it may actually take iterates on the Terraform code. So first, it might look for an off-hours policy inside a stacklet. If it doesn't have one, it's going to go and create a new one. It's then going to validate and dry run the policy. It may need to generate Terraform code, right? Because the resources for off hours may not exist just yet. Next, because off hours is something that requires some additional time in terms of understanding the impact. Um, it may wait, a few hours to maybe a few days in terms of running the policy and testing that the instances turn off at the right time and turn back on at the right time. And then it can utilize AcidDB and our historical cost data in order to measure the delta in resource cost, right? And then finally, in terms of notification, getting that back to the user so that we can have that outcome validation and make sure that our outcomes are aligned with the original user intent. Finally, just a quick summary on AI and FinOps, right? We've been talking about accelerating intent to policy, talking about cutting mean time to savings. I look at these two things as um, the AI stuff to really engage with policy authors, with a broader you know population of policy authors. In order to get you that faster mean time to savings, you're able to, if you're not familiar with the policy language, you're able to just describe what you want, and the agents can try to do it for you. Next, simplifying scaling FinOps, right? So, you don't, even if you're unfamiliar with YAML, or perhaps are maybe a little scared of the policy language, it's much easier to ease into that nowadays than ever before. And then finally, aligning FinOps with business value. Again, going from intent, like that's the ultimate key here is what's your business intent, right? Before it would require an engineer to go and try to understand what exactly that business value and business goal is. But you can ultimately just put that into uh, the LM itself to ask, hey, I have a goal of saving X amount of money, right? Can you author some policies that may do that? And agents, they could go and sort of look at what your cost is, see how it breaks down, see where your opportunities are. I think that's super, super interesting in terms of reducing that workload for you, and also be able to potentially find like new and novel ways to save money in the cloud. Suresh, any last comments on summary here?
Yeah, I really like that point of like going from intent based to the outcome. I would like to draw this analogy of like as developers went from imperative programming, okay, if this, then do this, then that, like that, right? That's how we used to program. And then that changed to a lot when we went to the declarative side of thing, like, I want this, but more like the language that you are mentioning for your policy authoring, like YAML or etc. That changed a lot. Like it is still not you're doing like I want this, etc. But it's a different domain specific language. But with AI now, it brings that additional layer of productivity where the natural language is converted into this declarative language, which is deterministically executing, right? So the language is non-deterministic. We don't know what word comes next from the AI model, but we are aligning it so that it actually generates the right policy and then steering it with proper guardrails, proper security, permissions, and everything. And what you guys doing is like amazing. So I think it just opens up lots of productivity to all the stakeholders involved throughout the life cycle of FinOps. To make everybody productive, right? They can understand the policy, just throw a policy and ask like what this is doing. Can this do this or that? Things like that. And also, okay, I want to this. Can you update the policy? Then it can able to generate the policy. So what it used to take maybe weeks is matter of minutes. And that's the kind of productivity that we are talking about by using AI models. Cool.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks, Suresh. And then, finally, just a quick, I won't dwell on this too long. We are coming to FinOps X, like I said. Feel free to come by the booth, booth number 11. In terms of, what we've got available inside Juno today, we have some of the more domain specific RAG stuff for Juno and tool usage. And we will be updating Juno in the coming weeks and months to, of course, get to a more agentic use case. Some of the use cases we described earlier today, we are using internally in terms of policy or intent to policy. It's been super exciting and powerful to see where we're going on this. Can't wait to talk to you all more. And with that being said, I will hand it back to the MCs.
Yes.